Oh, happy Monday, everyone, and welcome to the show where it really is okay to not be okay. I'm Rae Bonney, a qualified counsellor, workplace mental health specialist, not to mention a very dedicated and oftentimes enthusiastically disruptive men's issues advocate. Not every girl's dream job, but hey, remember, men also matter. Well, spring has finally sprung and the AFL finals are shaping up to be nothing less than spectacular and history-making competition. But always today, I'll be unwrapping one of the greatest gifts going around, and that is people. Layer by layer, we explore the thoughts, experiences, achievements and challenges of ordinary people bound to inspire the best you. At the same time, acknowledging that it really is okay to not be okay. So turn up the radio. The time is just 7 minutes past 12, and we just heard Steve-O's box of chocolates. Hey, Steve-O, I can see you out there. Got a bit racy for a while. John and I had a bit of a dance around Studio One. Anyway, I'm going to go back to the weather for a moment. Not so long ago, back in about 1979, Rob Gell, his 4-day forecast revolutionised the way television weather was presented. And for 31 years, he brought authority, information and credibility to TV news, introducing really cool things like satellite image sequences, integrated pressure analysis, and pretty much helped viewers make sense of it all. I caught up with Rob recently, sparking a university education-styled conversation, endorsing that Rob Gell truly is an amazingly informed spokesperson on environmental and media issues. He links strongly with the scientific and conservation communities, giving a convincing and compelling insight into the thinking and philosophies around these intricate issues. Now heading Rethink Sustainability initiatives, Rob and his team are passionate about helping organisations thoughtfully and knowledgeably transition to environmentally sustainable operations that in turn support the well-being of their people. And here he is right now joining me in the studios live here at 3WBC. Welcome, Rob.
Hi, Rae. Nice to be with you.
Nice little rap sheet there. I know that there's a lot more to it.
I didn't write that, did I?
No, you didn't. I just picked my favourite bits from the internet.
Right, there you go.
That could have gone on for quite some time with all of your accolades, by the way.
Well, it's been an interesting career. From a young physical geographer at Melbourne University in the early 70s, and I was fortunate, or unfortunate, I think fortunate to be in the tail end of the environment revolution, the first environment revolution at that time, and that sort of really changed the way I went about my business, the way I was thinking. And I went off and taught in a Bachelor of Environmental Science Education degree course in 1975, if you can believe that.
Not at all. Not looking at you now, I don't know what your beauty secret is, but it's working for you.
And then got into television for a long time. But so I said this sort of, in a sense, this sort of Jekyll and Hyde lifestyle, where my real interest was in environmentals, in environmental matters, but I had this public persona.
And that's right, but that's what people have consumed as well. So whenever we mention Rob Gell, it's like, oh, the weather guy. And since meeting you, I actually reversed that. Now, he was never the weather guy. There was always so much more going on underneath.
Yeah, it's nice to have a foil against television too, by the way. And I don't think I would have persisted for that long if I had only had television in my life. The fact that I had the other things really gave me a great interest and enabled me to have a really direct link with members of the community, either with environmental groups or public speaking or talking about other matters. So that was really sort of good for my sensibility as well.
And I know that you did colour outside the lines frequently. I remember watching you, the way that you were managed on TV. So you did manage to influence people. And when you came in here just before, you mentioned a person who thanked you. Was that recently?
Yeah, I know. I just noticed it today because we were just letting people know we were having a chat today. And we shout out to Ziggy Marie, who's describes herself on Facebook today as a white witch, but explaining that my weather presentations, in fact, because we should be very careful. The forecast comes from the Bureau, and my role is a presenter.
Yes.
So I'm a physical geographer, not a meteorologist, using maps and diagrams to tell stories. And if there's a skill, that's what it is. So Ziggy Marie said whatever I did on the television changed her life. So great.
Yes.
But if we can make people think about new things, that's a good thing to do. I guess I was fortunate in a couple of ways. Firstly, in the early years, well, let's say the first 2 decades, I was able to bring some of my thinking around how do you present data, weather data, to the television stations, both 10 in the first instance and then 9, and say, look, how do we do this? So if you think about back in my first year, I used to drive from Melbourne University, having, do the first hour, teach the first hour of a physical geography lab, go to the Weather Bureau, put 2 halves of a black and white satellite photograph on the back seat of the car, drive them out to Nunawading and put a bit of sticky tape between the turn. That was how we got satellite imagery in those days. But then we learned to do things like, I said, look, I want to put the pressure pattern over the top of the satellite photograph. These are just 2 different graphical ways of representing the same data. So all of a sudden, and they don't even do that anymore on the television. It's dreadful.
Well, who watches television anyway?
Well, okay. I know we get our weather from the phone nowadays, which is a good thing too, because some of that's really good stuff. So we're able to do a whole lot of really innovative things just by thinking through how do we, in an educative sense, get people to think differently or trying to understand the weather rather than just, the expected top temperature today is 22 degrees, which is meaningless.
That was my question is, do you think most people tune into weather because they want to know what to wear the next day or their party's not going to be rained out?
Yeah, but you've got to think about it's the sentence that goes before the estimated highest temperature, which is the bit that actually explains. So, and I do this with even prep kids, but certainly junior school kids. I give you 2 days in winter. One day is going to be 15 degrees with a howling northwesterly wind and no sunshine. And the next day is going to be 10 degrees but no wind and a blue sky. Which day do you feel warmest on in the playground? And they know it's the 10-degree day.
Yes.
Because you're absorbing the radiant heat and there's no wind. They don't know why, but they know that the brain tells them. So the estimated highest temperature in the case is meaningless.
Yes.
To your understanding of what dress you're going to wear tomorrow. You've actually got to understand.
But it's a really good way
conditions.
Of describing it, especially to children. And if you're looking at early intervention now, how are we influencing our younger generations to start thinking about our environment just as a matter of course, like we think about our physical health or our mental health.
It's an important thing. I actually mention this occasionally to guys if I get on the golf course and, there'll be grey butcherbird singing and I'll say, you understand that's important to your brain. You evolve, your brain needs to hear that. And they said, what are you talking about, Joe, you idiot? I said, no, we've actually...
Because I'm looking at you going, what are you talking about?
We actually need to see green things. We actually need to feel grass under our feet. That's the 1,000 years of human evolution, which is not as long as the plants, for example. The plants have been evolving for 400 million, right? They're much more highly evolved in many cases. We're talking with a couple of mates of mine, the mitochondria in cells. These are the most fantastic bits of stuff that actually choose to accept photons of light from the sun when they want to.
Wow.
This is really,
You should see Rob now, he's getting so excited.
This. So no, we do need to hear birdsong. We need to see the waves crashing up on the beach and absorbing the wave energy. We need to see that it's part of our genetic code, right? So it's fundamental that we act. And I spoke about this yesterday to be able to open an art exhibition for Rob Freeman, who does his most extraordinary drawings of eagles and peregrine falcons and magpies and things. And it's fundamental that we actually understand the value of nature, because Australians don't. Australians don't value nature. They don't even care about nature. I heard a scientist talking about this. He's just, really imploring people to understand the value of nature. We cannot have an economy unless we've got a valuable natural world. I mean, this was Gaylord, I can't remember his name, First Earth Day, 1970 in the United States, made the statement, we need to understand it. Our economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of our environment, not the reverse. Unless our environment is stable and functioning, we got nothing. Kill all the bees, what pollinates our crops? Well, we want to build an agricultural system. Our oceans disperse in Victoria. We still put our human waste in the sea.
And other things.
Right? So we've really got to understand that, we got this...
But going back to, sorry to interrupt you, but going back to Australians not caring about nature, I think Australians typically we've grown up in a continent which is jam-packed with nature from one end of the spectrum to the other. And I'm going back to our original discussion at a special do at Metropolitan Golf Club. Now, I thought I was pretty passionate about my advocacy and shouting people's faces, but you really, really impressed me and I could have talked to you all night. But I left that conversation with a mixture of inspiration and hope for what I could do, but also feeling a bit of shame and ignorance as well. And some of the way that you described things really made sense to me. And I've since I had that conversation, I've made lots of little changes to my life, which is not saying that I'm brilliant or amazing, but what is it that we're not hearing? Why aren't we caring?
I think that the very important thing that you've done, you've just changed the way you think about things now, and that's what we need to do. So we argue in our business.
And not that I was bad or anything, because I was always mindful, but
if you're not exposed to those issues, you're not going to know about it. So what we talk about in our business, for example, we say there's a sustainability outcome in every business decision you make, and you need to know that you're making the right one. Yep. Be a granddaughter now, which changes the way you think about
Congratulations.
things. So we need to have that long-term view of things. So what is sustainability outcome I can generate from this business decision? Knowing it's either a climate decision, or it's a procurement and waste management issue, or it's a transport and logistics and cost management issue, or how make sure I'm using less brown coal when I run my office building, or something like that. There are any number of things you do. I mean, how do I choose not to buy plastic because I'm not sure where that's going anymore? Thought it was being recycled, but now I know it's not. We've got to massively change it. How can I change my manufacturing process to use less energy and create less waste? So there's a whole lot of things. How can I run my office building, get it up to 5-star green or whatever I'm going to do? What targets I'm setting? We've actually changed our business to do more of that. So rather than more plans, goals, and strategies.
So your business, Rethink.
Yeah, we're about targets. We actually, if you say, well, what can we do? We actually know what to do. We've just got to choose to make the right choices. We actually know what to do to get a better outcome for my granddaughter. We just got to either incentivise, or people have actually got to stand up and be leaders in their own business or their own school or their own community or their own government, and actually choose to make the right choices for the longer term for my granddaughter.
Well, this is part of your DNA, clearly. And I'm going to sort of step back a little bit just because we are here at 94.1 FM, 3WBC, Whitehorse Burundara Community Radio, and you did grow up in this area and went to Koonung High and Campbell.
In its first year.
Oh, well, I was going to say, because it's a relatively new school. But, being part of your DNA, when was the first time that you started thinking about this?
Because a couple of things happened at home. I don't know. I don't think a lot of
So I've taken you all the way off your...
You're making me think hard.
Yes.
We actually used to do, sit around the kitchen table at dinner, and Dad in particular would say, what's the capital of Nicaragua? So we did that old geography, capes and bays stuff. So I probably at 11 knew that the capital of Nicaragua was Managua in 1900 and frozen to death. But so we used to do that stuff. So there was a bit of awareness. I don't even know why we did that. It wasn't a particular interest of Dad's, but we did those things. Then we got a bit involved at home in bird watching and native plants. So I had a bit of an introduction. But as I say, the real change was my first year at university was 1971. Now, I was in the last call up to go to Vietnam. We had a pirate radio station on campus. We had a federal police break-in to Melbourne University Union to break out draft resistors. We had 2 moratorium marches that year of 100,000 people protesting against the Vietnam War. And at the same time, we had this environment revolution that was sparked by Rachel Carson's book Silent Spring in the mid-60s, and Gareth Hardin's A Tragedy of the Commons, and Paul Ehrlich was writing about population, resources and environment. We had all this brand new stuff that was hitting our reading lists as it was being published. So it was new for our professors at the same time, and that was transformational. So I came straight out of university and was invited to teach in a Bachelor of Environmental Science Education degree course in 1975. People were passionate about it. And in those days, and if I then jump ahead to about, I can't think of his name now, from NASA, the godfather of climate science, I'll think of his name in a moment, we've set this 2-degree target for Paris, and people say, why did you choose 2 degrees? And we said, well, when we set that in 1980, in the late 1980s, we didn't ever think there'd be a problem achieving it because there'd be a public response.
A response, yes.
We just picked it out of the air. But now here we are, we're probably not going to make it, right? Because there's been no response.
Yeah.
So we've known about this stuff for decades. I mean, we learned at the Paris climate talks that Exxon's known about climate change since the 50s and 60s. And they've worked actively against any response to it because of their own vested interest. So we actually need now to really set some strong targets. And fortunately, I credit to Victorian state government, they're setting some really strong targets to manage not only climate change and emissions, but actually to manage our energy demand. So they've worked out, like most sensible governments around the world, and there's some others that are less sensible, that if you've got to generate new energy, and we do need to, we've got a growing population, we've now got 5 million people, right? So we need more energy resources. It's actually cheaper to build wind and solar than it is to build more coal-fired power stations. And you get the added bonus of zero emissions.
Well, that's right. Well, we were talking about this when you came into the studio earlier, and the wind farms, and coming from the humble windmill, that used to pump water and grind seeds or grain, whatever that might be.
Still operating in Holland too, very valuably.
But beautiful, picturesque things. But there seems to be this reaction to wind farms. Let's find some dirt on them, like, for example, the environment, the wildlife. It kills all these bats and birds. And I'm just thinking, is that a conflatist? Oh, look,
thing? It's an interesting thing. I remember being in Sierra Nevada in Spain, where they got enormous numbers of wind farms. It was one of the, you can always remember in your life the things that went wrong or things you didn't do properly. And one of the things I did, I actually took some video of, they don't have Nankeen kestrels like we do in Australia, but a bird, the equivalent, it's a small falcon. And it was actually hovering between the turbines. It actually learned to use the wind going through the turbines. It was actually using them to hunt. So it had adapted already. Now, I actually then recorded something something over that bit of vision. I wish I hadn't done it. But
You need to go back.
But there's Roger Jones, who's a former CSIRO climate scientist, who's now at Victoria University, made the statement once when there was aggressive response to wind farms in South Gippsland, because the argument was, those wind turbines, they might kill an orange-bellied parrot, right? The trumped-up corella of Jeff Kennett, which is the most magnificent bird, and they're just hanging on by the skin of their beaks currently in terms of their global population. There are very few of them. But Roger's comment was, compared to 10 centimetres of sea level rise, which is going to flood the salt marshes where they get their food, a wind turbine killing a couple is not going to make a bloody one iota of difference. No. So you've got to put some of this stuff in perspective.
But that's right. But that's how the media conflates it to make a stand, and of course the sheeples believe.
But we need to make the point there are no health impacts that are recognised from wind turbines. And my question of people always is, well, those great big towers we use to string cables across the state, do you know how many of them there are in Victoria? There are 20,000. We weren't asked whether we wanted any of those. And if you ask me whether I'd rather look at a wind turbine or one of those great big ugly towers, I know what I'd rather look at.
Power lines? They're everywhere.
And the power lines, and the health impacts from those if you happen to have your house underneath them. So, it takes us back to the lovely movie about the castle. Right. So,
that's right. Sorry to interrupt you there, Rob, but I was thinking as we were talking about how do we make change, how do we make sustainable change, and how do we become part of this without feeling helpless and hopeless that we're just this tiny footprint. And my 9-year-old came back from China with his dad a few months ago, and he said to me, it's weird there. He said, you can taste it. You can actually taste it. It's horrible. And he said, why do people live there and why do people do that? From his mind. And he said, I know that we manufacture things there because every time you turn something up, it's made in China. So we know where it is. But where's the grass? Like your point before, that human beings need to be engaged with nature, with the grass, with the birds. So how do these people in China?
Well, China's moving very fast. Unfortunately, your husband and son went there at the wrong time.
He's actually not my husband. He's somebody else's
somebody
husband.
else, that's right.
But that's all right.
Last time I was in Beijing, I went during APEC, and the sky was blue and there was no pollution for 2 weeks. They shut everything down. They know exactly what the problem is, and they have a very, very wealthy middle class in China, which are changing their diet to meat and dairy too, which has got its own consequences.
Diabetes,
but they're demanding clear skies. So most Australians be unaware, for example, that all of China now is operating under a carbon price and an emissions trading scheme, right? I can show you a photograph of a solar field in northwestern China of 4 million panels. They're the world's leaders in panel manufacture. They changed cities. Shenzhen, back in about 2010, the mayor of Shenzhen said all new residential buildings over whatever stories must be 100% renewable energy powered for hot water and electricity.
Wow.
Well, guess what they make in Shenzhen? Solar panels and double glazing.
Yes.
So they're creating the markets for their own businesses. But they're also shutting down. I mean, you wouldn't be allowed to have a Hazelwood or a couple of our power stations in China. They're shutting all those down. So they are building some new ones, but they're world leaders and they're putting in huge offshore wind farms. They're putting in huge solar fields, as the rest of the world is, as Victoria's. We just announced last week, I think 3 new wind farms, huge wind farms, and 3 big solar fields.
Where is the energy stored from wind farms?
Well, it's not at present. It goes into the grid, but we've now got the Horndale battery in South Australia and 2 coming to Victoria as well, and there'll be more. One of the things.
What is that, Rob?
That's just a big battery.
Yeah.
So you take you store the energy, and you can buy that for your house. So So we're doing that. We're actually providing that to our clients as well. A solar, battery, and energy monitoring tool. So you can actually store and you can run it off your phone, right? You can demand shift your energy generated from your solar panels into your battery at an appropriate time, or keep it, or store it, or use it, or whatever you want to do. This is the next generation of stuff that's coming. We'll ultimately store energy probably in 2 ways. The other thing that's coming, which we don't hear a lot about in the media, is hydrogen storage. There are one clear one in northeastern Victoria. There's a proposal to take little township of Millawa off-grid using hydrogen. So what do? You actually hydrolyze water. You use solar energy, electricity from solar, to crack open water molecules and produce hydrogen and store it. Infinite. There are no losses. There are losses in batteries, and you keep it, and you either burn it in your stove as a gas, or you put it into a fuel cell and run and generate electricity from it again. So these technologies are coming. CSIRO is a world leader in this. They've got a new metal filter that you can actually transport. So if you talk about you've heard of ammonia, chemical formula NH4, so 1 nitrogen atom and 4 hydrogen atoms. You can actually transport hydrogen, H2, as ammonia, push the ammonia through a metal filter and re-extract the hydrogen. So you can actually transport the hydrogen as ammonia and re-extract it, so it becomes portable. You can transport it. So these things are happening. CSIRO is a world leader in that. The other way we can store energy, of course, is in what we now call pumped hydro. I was reading on the weekend of an old gold mine in Queensland. Got their two big holes in the ground. One's higher than the other. So what do? You fill them up with water, use solar energy, solar pumps, pump the water from the lower dam to the higher dam during the day when the sun's shining, and then you run the water downhill through a turbine and generate electricity at night. Now that's what Malcolm Turnbull's proposed for Snowy 2.0. And ultimately we'll have about a lot of storage, about 20% of the grid or the network will need to be in pumped hydro. So we can actually store energy in that form as a renewable energy form. So we've got the technologies to do these things.
So is this Australian technology, or
you can do it anywhere you like?
Right.
I mean,
has it been developed here, or
it's happening here? And Bogong Dam up in the northeastern ranges, it already operates like that. Red Energy do that already. So actually, when the price of energy is low, you use that price to pump your water to the top of the hill, and you release it when there's either greater demand or when the price is higher. So there's a lot of economics around this too. Sanjeev Gupta is doing the same in Whyalla. He's reinvigorated the Arium steel mill. He's actually making steel now with renewable energy, right? No carbon price. And he's using the old iron ore pits, pump salt water from the sea up to the top of the hill during the daylight hours, and then release it as stored energy at other times when they need it. Plus he's put in $1 billion worth of solar, and he's going to put another 700 million or something like that. So this is transforming the way we do business.
Why aren't we telling these stories more, Rob? Why are the media jumping all over this? Because these are fantastic examples of not only how we're evolving in the space, but what people are doing.
We've lapsed over the last, I sort of watched this a bit during my media career. We've lapsed into this sort of, politics and sport media, and then toss in The Bachelor and, a few other cooking shows. Whereas that's actually not what television was designed for. Television was designed to bring information to the people quickly and easily with pictures. So the other comment that I make is, this is more complex stuff. People don't always like to have, it's harder to think about. My flippant answer is, this is not simple like economics. This is actually difficult stuff. This is a bit of science.
Yeah.
And you actually got to think a bit hard about it. But I think we at the stage now where we do need, and I tried for many, many years to get to television networks in particular to do a lot more about this information, because I think there is a great appetite for it. Now there's an appetite in business. Smart businesses get this stuff, and they're moving forward very rapidly. Others have no idea. So if even your own experience,
yes.
Once you learn about it, there's another way of doing this which is beneficial to my granddaughter. Let's go that way.
But I'm not even really aware of what my options are or where to find those options. And I'll talk a little bit more about Rethink, your organisation, because you sort of touched on that just now about how you work with your customers. So you work with both business and domestic customers in helping them develop better ways of being sustainable. Yeah,
mostly commercial.
Yes.
And if I give you an example, and he won't mind if we use him. So do you know Millerwa Cheese?
Yes.
Right. So David Brown, who runs Millerwa Cheese, in fact, his daughter Caridwan's taken over as CEO. Brownie's been a mate of mine for a long, long time. And long story short, we've just saved him about 78% of his electricity bill.
Wow.
Right? We borrowed some money, but what has he done? Firstly, we recontracted him, who actually got him on the lowest possible rate. Then we looked at his lighting and how he's running his compressors on his refrigeration. Lighting saved about 56%, putting variable speed drives on compressors, another 40%. Then we put 100 kilowatts of solar on the roof of his factory. Spent about $250,000, but you borrow that at a low rate through the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, spread the payments over 10 years, and he's revenue positive from day one. Right? So it's a simple thing to do.
But even when you're mentioning things like the Clean Energy Finance Organisation, I would not know that was a thing. And many people wouldn't.
It's Julia Gillard's legislation, the so-called carbon tax, which Tony Abbott was an advocate for a carbon tax when Kevin Rudd was proposing the carbon pollution reduction scheme. It's all very silly and complex. But those things are available. We're talking to a company this morning who's going to put 50, 60 kilowatts of solar on their roof. They'll pay that off in 2.1 years. And then they're ahead, right?
Yes.
They're going to save 1.25 million in costs over 10 years or something like that. I forget what the numbers are. So, but here we've got everyone in Australia complaining about electricity prices. We haven't even bothered to put insulation in our roofs or change our light globes or do all the other things. The cheapest energy you can buy is the stuff you don't use.
Yes.
Right? So if you change your thinking to that, instead of bleeding bleating to Josh Frydenberg or now Angus Taylor about the cost of energy. Just work out how to use less and improve the efficiency of your production process. So we're doing a lot of that work currently in energy efficiency because it's kind of the flavour of the month because everyone's complaining about it. But we're also talking about, environmental social governance for capital finance companies. But how do you ensure that the products that you might encourage people to invest in are going to be sustainable in the real sense? We were talking earlier about this massive divestment movement around the world, and this is part of the problem we've got now in our shift in Australia strongly towards renewable energy. We've got stranded assets now. Hazelwood effectively was a stranded asset. It was old technology. It got an extra 20 years life out of it. There's in the order of, 100 billion euros worth of stranded energy assets in Europe currently because the Germans have all gone to wind and solar and whatever. The other thing that's happening, this is no longer efficient, and we've got strong emissions targets in some countries, not yet in Australia. The other thing that's happening is divestment movement. People have worked out that I wouldn't want to have even at my age, if I was 25 or 30, I'd need to look at my superannuation fund and I'd want to make sure I didn't have too many investments in coal, for example.
Right, yes.
Right? Now, when Tony Abbott and Joe Hockey were bleating about Australian National University divesting, I think, $16.4 million from fossil fuel stocks, Stanford University, the second highest ranked university in the world after MIT, Stanford University divested $18.6 billion because they worked out that the stocks they had invested in, they did a reassessment of them. And they said, these companies, half of the valuation of these companies is stuff that's still in the ground that's never going to be realised. We think they're 50% overvalued. We're out. Rockefeller Brothers divested $55 billion. The oil family divested $55 billion from fossil fuel stocks. That number's up to around about $3 trillion now over the last 5 or 6 years. So we've got a lot of coal and oil companies that are really suffering because they're losing investor value.
That's a lot to absorb, Rob.
Yeah. Well, this is going on, and this comes back to your point about why don't we hear about this?
Yes.
I'd love any Prime Minister to be talking about that, to be explaining to Australians, in fact, where the rest of the world's going. I use social media, and I put out a tweet last week. It'd be nice if the new Prime Minister actually acknowledged Antonio Guterres, the head of the United Nations, his statement last week about climate. We're banging down the door to be part of the Security Council, so we love the United Nations when it's valuable to us, or we think it might be, but we kind of disregard a lot of the stuff that United Nations, particularly the United Nations Environment Program, has done over the years. So, we sort of want to have our cake and eat it. There's a lot of stuff. We are, as a geographer, I used the term, not only are we physically isolated from the rest of the world, we're geographically, we're intellectually isolated as well. So we don't hear a lot about the really good things that are happening in the EU in particular. But Mexico, Argentina, these are world leaders in sustainability, right? Australians wouldn't know, whilst our emissions in Australia are increasing again since Tony Abbott killed the carbon tax. They were coming down. United States peaked their emissions back in 2007. The United States emissions curve is coming down. California has had a flat emissions curve since 1972 because they changed their building codes and made people use double glazing. And California back in those days actually had a target for 5% electric vehicles then. They didn't achieve it, but that was their target.
But it was still there.
It was still there.
It was still
right?
there.
So they changed all their building codes and made their buildings more efficient, and they started doing all sorts of smart stuff. So we've known about this for 3-4 decades, and that's the point pushing in our business. No more plans, goals and strategies. We know what to do. If you've got some money to spend on doing something right, do something. You don't need a strategy, just do something.
Because nothing's changing. It's not like all of a sudden the environment's going to repair itself and we're going to be good to go, which I think is sometimes the attitude of people. We're going to go to a quick break, Rob, because whilst we've been having this conversation, a few people have phoned into John Farmer with some questions that they have for you about this really important topic, which is great because people are thinking about it. Now, Joni Mitchell, she had a bit of a moment back in 1970 and she was in Hawaii at the time, and she's actually quoted as saying, "I wrote Big Yellow Taxi on my first trip to Hawaii. I took a taxi to the hotel, and when I woke up the next morning, I threw back the curtains and saw these beautiful green mountains in the distance. Then I looked down and there was a parking lot as far as the eye could see, and it broke my heart. This blight on paradise." That's when I sat down and wrote the song. Broke her heart. So we're going to play that song now, and when we come back, we're going to answer some of those questions. Don't go away. Well, welcome back. Listening to 94.1 FM. It's 3WBC with Rae Bonney, joined by passionate environmental campaigner and director of Rethink Sustainability, Rob Gell. Welcome back.
Thank you, Ray. Nice to be here. That that's just an extraordinary song. I mean, here we are still in 2018 saying to supermarkets, I don't mind spots on my apples, leave out the DDT. So we're saying, I don't mind spots on my apples, and why are we wrapping them up in plastic and contributing to this massive problem? So, we actually know we've actually got to take, communities have got to stand up, be stronger.
Well, we've just seen the whole plastic bag removal thing, which I'm quite pleased about. That's great. However, there are so many other things we could be doing at the same time. Like if you're going to do that, take the coffee cups at the same time, because that's a no-brainer.
Yeah, look, I love my coffee. I mean, the issue about plastic, that's a litter problem. It's a problem because we got plastic bags flying around the streets. We don't really see it otherwise. Behind the scenes in any supermarket, there's more thin film plastic than you can imagine.
Yes.
That's where the problem
But where
is.
are our choices with this? Because, I shop at the supermarket. My alternatives are growing my own produce in my garden, which I can't do that because I'm just not very good at it. So we can shop at co-ops and we can shop at all different spaces, but it's not always convenient and quite often is more expensive.
If we had a carbon price on plastic made out of oil,
Okay.
right, we would be making different choices, and that's what
Manufacturers would be.
Yeah, absolutely. It should be passed on to the consumer. That's the point of a market mechanism. Yes. I choose to buy a V8 6-litre BMW that pollutes more. Sure, I should pay the environmental cost.
Yes.
If I want to buy all of my fruit and veg wrapped up in plastic, which has got a whole range of, and I can list them now, environmental outcomes, put the carbon price in the plastic, and sooner or later I'll choose not to do that. And there'll be a shift, and we'll reduce our emissions, and we'll reduce our waste, and we'll have a better planet. The world is doing this, and I wish Australia would just wake up to it. So the other thing we've done, of course, is we've mishandled those sort of products. So we've been taught that the box is the recycling, and it's not. It's a box of recyclables which need to be recycled. So we've become very good collectors of stuff because some businesses found markets in China to send it to out of sight, out of mind. So we actually don't do nearly enough recycling.
Yes.
We've got about 90 odd plastics recyclers in this country, and we need to support them and build. Former Minister for Environment, Josh Frydenberg, announced, I want all plastic to be recyclable by, I think he said 2025. Well, of course, it's already recyclable.
Yes.
We just don't recycle it.
Yes.
So we've got to change, and there's got to be some incentives or mechanisms to force that. Carbon tax would be a perfectly good example of what you might do.
Yeah, put your hand in your pocket makes people think.
Well, if I'm spending, if I don't want to spend the money, make another choice. Go to a health food store and get your honey in bring your own jar if you want to go that far.
Yep.
But at least perfectly packaged bananas don't need to sit on a polystyrene tray wrapped in Glad wrap.
No.
Right? You go to Cairo, I learned, my mate was there. He said, Robbie, don't buy any lettuces because they're washed in the water. Buy things that's got a natural, so buy oranges, bananas, and anything with natural packaging.
Yes.
Right? So, okay, good.
Oh, there you go.
There you go. So, we've just got to think more about our decision making. And absolutely.
Do you think we're really married to that whole aesthetic thing as well? I worked with ICI back in about 1989 for their crop care area. Crop care. Interesting term, isn't
right.
it?
That's interesting terminology.
And of course, I was such a convert. I loved working there, an amazing organisation. Loved it. But really became very converted to chemicals are great because they give us better food.
Yep.
And you saw it because it looked better and bigger and bright. So I think there's still that seduction.
Well, there is. And the other thing we've learned to do, we were told that, we've made the money, so polluter pays, I'll pay the price. But we hadn't actually thought about the consequences of those decisions. But, Orica's still got PCBs stored at Port Botany that they can't get rid of, right? Monsanto, finally, being grilled pretty heavily on how you grow soybeans because they had sort of leftover defoliants from Vietnam War that they wanted to keep selling because they made a fortune. So, why chemical company producing genetically resistant soybeans? Because they want to sell more chemicals.
That's
I mean,
right.
give me a break.
Yeah.
So we've actually got to think about our choices. When I do presentations, one of the slides I put up, and remember this, everybody, if you're listening, when you walk through the supermarket and you turn into that aisle and it's got, from head high to the floor, plastic bottles full of chemicals. You know the row I'm talking about, all of the disinfectants and all of the detergents. Where does all that stuff go, do you think? Not only the packaging, but the stuff. It goes, in Melbourne's case, either to Werribee Sewage Farm and ultimately to the ocean, to the sea, or the same if it goes down to Carrum, right? Think about your choices. I've got a lovely slide from a Coles supermarket and it's got down, down, down. And of course, that's where it goes. It goes down, down the drain.
Yes. And then you eat the chemically produced stuff that turns into stuff that goes down to Werribee Sewage Farm as well.
You just got to think about what we put in the supermarket trolley.
I love the hospitality food industry. My son's a chef. He works out at Oak Ridge Wines with Matt Stone.
Lucky. It's nice.
Yes, he's very talented and he works very hard. So they're very lucky to have him as well. I love what they stand for out there. Everything is produced out there. They grow all of their own stuff. They mill their own flour. They use local producers. farmers for their stuff. Anything that's in their veggie patch that needs to be used, they use it. They're not determined by a menu. They're determined by what's
growing
on hand, and get no lesser experience of amazing food.
And wouldn't it be nice if, as Victorians, we were just sitting waiting quietly for our own strawberries to ripen, and they'll be in our supermarkets in 2 or 3 weeks' time, rather than assuming you can buy strawberries in 12 months at a time and import them from Queensland with needles in them.
Oh, yes. Well, can I ask you a question on
That's
that?
a bit nasty, but
when we're buying seeds from Bunnings to grow stuff in our garden, with genetic modification or any pesticides that are impregnated into those seeds, like what are we looking at there?
You're asking the wrong person. I'm not really up to speed on this, but we need to understand. I forget what the numbers are, looking at them just recently, but for example, we've lost most of the genetic diversity in the fruit and veg that we eat. I mean, we used to have let's say 50 different species of apples. Now we've got 7 or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, 90% of the birds on the planet are now chickens.
Until they're dead and turn up at McDonald's,
So, we've really got to think about, I've moved from plants, you're asking me about seed.
Yes.
We actually need to understand, we actually need that genetic diversity, and we need to try and rebuild them. I mean, why do people like heirloom tomatoes? All of a sudden say, oh, what's that black one? Or carrot. Yeah,
purple carrots.
Purple carrots. Oh, that's really nice. They've been swept up in this sort of marketer's paradise where they say, oh, no, the public demands it. The public didn't demand aerosol cans pressure packed by CFC. We didn't know about it. They appeared on the market and then they get promoted. And it really was a poor choice. So for the last, there's a couple of decades in there where we really did some stupid stuff. We didn't think
the fact
long
that there's
term.
still aerosol cans on the market just astounds me.
Well, they've got different propellants and stuff like that. But,
still,
frankly,
even when you're around it and you breathe it, you go, oh, that feels like it's about to kill me.
Yeah, stuff where you see on the television about, poor mum where she's convinced that if she wipes down her toilet bowl with chlorine, it's going to stop germs. I mean, it's just, it's nonsense, absolute nonsense. And you got to remember where that chlorine goes, because it doesn't break down.
No.
It doesn't break down. Days when I was a student, we actually worked in a chemical engineering factory down in Moorabbin for some summer cash to go away surfing and stuff. We used to put dieldrin in our carpets.
What's that?
It's a really nasty chemical, one of the ones that Rachel Carson wrote about. I mean, it's a really serious bad stuff. We used to put our carpets in it to stop the moths from eating the carpets, and they'd advertise them on the television with babies crawling around on the new, I won't use the brand name.
Yeah.
And I said, my God, you want to kill your kid?
Yeah.
So we just got to think through this stuff and understand that, the natural world's there.
I think you said it before, just visualizing that aisle in the supermarket, visualizing what's going into your body. One of the things that I was doing after speaking with you was visualizing every time I got into my car to multiply my car right across the planet, every single moment of every single day, and then colouring in the emissions in pink. I made them pink so I could actually see. And I passed this on to Rory, my little one, so he's starting to talk about, he's an analogy about what comes out of your bottom and maybe having that coloured green.
Oh, well, he's learning to understand waste.
But we've got 7 minutes left of the show. We didn't get to any of our questions.
Oh, yeah, well, let's do a couple at least.
Yeah, let's just do a couple. So this one's from Jeremy in Lilydale, and it's a good one, and it might be the only one we ask, because he said global warming is a global issue. What are 3 things listeners can do right now that will have a significant impact?
Well, the first thing in Victoria, we still effectively burn brown coal to turn on the lights. So turn off the light. Just use less.
Were you one of those dads, Rob? Turn off the bloody lights.
Oh, yes, and I still do. I have difficulty at home getting lights turned off still. But
how would you raise families like you?
Well, my son's an actor, and he sort of. Let's not go there.
The bright lights of Hollywood.
Let's answer to Jeremy's question.
Yes.
There are a number of things you can do. So we need to use less, particularly in Victoria. We need to look at our choices. We need to think about the embodied energy in everything we purchase, and that goes right down to cement, for example, highly massive. There's as much energy in the cement manufacturing industry as in the airline industry and the shipping industry combined, because there's a chemical reaction that produces truckloads of emissions, right? So we've actually got to stop building by 2030 our cities out of steel and concrete.
Wow.
Because we won't be able to tolerate the emissions from those two industries. So that's going to challenge a few people, but that's where we need to go. So we need to just start making some simple choices about, or, instead of turning on the air conditioner, you've got another cold morning tomorrow, no, put on something warmer. Or in summertime, take your jumper off instead of turning on the air conditioner, or open the bloody window or something like that. But just work out what your alternatives are. But then it's simple things that are good for your health too. Walk, ride a bike, catch a tram, all of that data.
I think Melbourne does bike riding very, very well, thanks to work
Better.
of Craig Richards of Bicycle Network. Give him a bit of a shout out. He's my friend.
Yeah.
Mike Sabey, you know Mike Sabey, because
Yes.
that's where we met many years ago. And we wrote the first Melbourne Bike Paths book in about 1980 something.
But don't come back to Jeremy's question, and then you need to hammer your local member, Jeremy, to make sure that your council out there is doing some really good things. They need to set strong targets for their own emissions reduction, and they need to work very strongly to provide incentives for businesses that want to use less energy. So City of Wangaratta, for example, putting in a large-scale solar farm because they want to attract businesses to their industrial precinct, and they want to base it on low-cost renewable energy, right? So those are that's the next scale up.
But that's really, when you describe it like that, that's really achievable. Not overnight.
Absolutely.
But when we look at business strategy, I mean, Jeff Kent's very famous for his 5-year strategies, but, any business is going to sit down and have one. So why couldn't you include something like, a project?
And if you're running a business, you say, I want to go, I will preferentially move my business to someone who's going to provide me with renewable energy, with a renewable energy opportunity from some infrastructure that they've invested in.
Well, look, I think that's going to be the end of the show for today, Rob. I would love for you to come back because it seems like we've only just really scratched the surface. But thank you for imparting all of that.
It's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed it.
Did you learn anything?
You always do in conversation, and you learn. Let's get some more questions, though, and we might look at those in a month or something like that, because that's when you really start to learn about what the community is interested in and where they think they can make a difference. Because I know that the Australian community, we're really good at adopting new technologies. We're really good at making better choices, but we've got to be presented with them properly. So it's good if it works both ways. If I've got a voice, for example, it's more than most.
You do.
I need to be informed about what people think they can do, what they'd like to do quickest and best, and more often. So that's
where
a
can
good
people
process.
contact you at Rethink?
Well, it's Rob at Rethink Sustainability, one word.com.au, or even easier, and don't deluge me, people, Rob at robgell.com.
Or do deluge him. He'd love it. He'd love it. He's got more words than the Oxford Dictionary to use.
Happy to take questions from people, or if people have got some issues or some concerns, if we can possibly help, we'd be delighted.
Fantastic. Now, if you have any feedback for me as well, you can contact me either at my Facebook page, which is Rae Bonney, or email is rae.bonney@3wbc.org.au. Now, next up we have Ken Lyons. He's back from his jaunt in Vietnam, looking fit as a fiddle at 94. Gosh, Ken. And he's talking about allergy because we have spring. So that's a really, really good topic. And stick around after that for Michelle Ciccardo and her light classical show. Always on this show, I like to remind people that if any uncomfortable feelings have surfaced for you during our discussion, please call Lifeline 131114. Suicide callback service is 1300 659 467 and emergency services 000. I'll be back next week, but until then, remember that it really is okay to not be okay, and ask the question, what does it feel like being you today? See ya.